The extraordinary story I'm about to share with you today began on a cold and windy Monday morning in September, precisely at 6 o'clock in the morning, when the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, when Marina Oliveira, a 34-year-old woman with gentle brown eyes and calloused hands that told stories of years of hard manual labor, arrived nervous and hesitant at the luxurious mansion of Fernando Costa, a 50-year-old, extremely successful businessman in the import and export industry who lived completely alone in an immense property located in the most expensive and exclusive gated community in the entire metropolitan region, where only millionaires, celebrities, and people of extreme wealth could afford to purchase homes. Marina carried with her a small, worn canvas bag containing her few belongings, a letter of recommendation from her previous employer, written on yellowed paper that she clutched tightly as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and a fragile hope mixed with deep anxiety about this new opportunity that could potentially change the trajectory of her difficult life, that had been marked by constant financial struggles and personal losses that would have broken many people completely. The massive iron gate of the property opened slowly with an electronic hum, revealing a perfectly manicured garden that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, with exotic flowers imported from distant countries, sculpted hedges trimmed into geometric shapes by professional landscapers, and a marble fountain in the center that sparkled beautifully in the morning light as water cascaded down in mesmerizing patterns. Fernando Costa stood watching from the second-floor window of his home office, a room filled with expensive dark-wood furniture, leather-bound books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves, and modern technology, including multiple computer screens displaying stock market data and business metrics in real time. He observed this thin woman climbing the white marble steps leading to the main entrance with careful, hesitant steps, noting her cheap, worn shoes, her simple faded dress that had clearly been washed hundreds of times, and the way she held herself with a mixture of nervousness and quiet dignity that intrigued him immediately. At 50 years old, Fernando was a man who had built an empire from almost nothing through decades of relentless work, strategic thinking, and occasional ruthlessness in business dealings. But that success had come at an enormous personal cost that he was only beginning to truly understand and feel in the deepest parts of his being. His marriage of 22 years had ended in a bitter and extremely painful divorce 3 years ago when his wife left him for a younger man, taking with her not just half his wealth as determined by the courts, but also his 2 adult children who had sided with their mother and rarely spoke to him anymore, despite his repeated attempts to rebuild those broken relationships. Since that devastating loss, Fernando had thrown himself even more obsessively into his work as a way to avoid dealing with the crushing loneliness and emotional pain that threatened to overwhelm him whenever he slowed down long enough to actually feel what was happening inside his heart. The mansion where he now lived alone, except for a few household staff members, was enormous and cold despite all its luxury and expensive furnishings purchased by an interior decorator who charged astronomical fees. It had 7 bedrooms that were never used, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 16 people, but where he ate alone every single night, a home theater that sat empty collecting dust, a swimming pool that remained covered most of the year, and a wine cellar stocked with bottles worth thousands of dollars each that nobody ever drank because he had no friends to share them with anymore. The silence in that house was deafening and oppressive, broken only by the sound of his own footsteps echoing through the empty hallways late at night when insomnia kept him awake and pacing like a caged animal. Marina was the 5th cook he had hired in the past 18 months, as the previous 4 had all quit within weeks, unable to tolerate his demanding standards, his cold and distant demeanor, his tendency to criticize harshly and rarely offer praise or even basic courtesy, and the oppressive atmosphere of loneliness and sadness that permeated every corner of that beautiful but lifeless house that felt more like a prison than a home. When Marina finally entered through the massive front door made of solid mahogany imported from Brazil, she was immediately struck by the overwhelming contrast between the exterior beauty and the interior emptiness of the space. The entrance hall was magnificent with its soaring ceiling paintings, crystal chandelier that probably cost more than she would earn in 5 years, and marble floors polished to a mirror shine. But there was something deeply unsettling about the complete absence of any warmth or life in the atmosphere. There were no family photographs displayed on the walls or tables, no children's artwork proudly hung on the refrigerator, no comfortable worn furniture that invited people to sit and relax, no pleasant cooking smells wafting from the kitchen, no sounds of laughter or conversation or even television playing in the background. Just cold, heavy, suffocating silence that made her want to turn around and run away immediately before she got trapped in whatever sadness haunted this place. Fernando descended the curved staircase exactly at 6:30 in the morning, wearing an expensive tailored suit even though he had no meetings scheduled that day, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his face cleanly shaven, every detail of his appearance controlled and perfect, except for his eyes, which betrayed a deep exhaustion and sadness that no amount of money or success could hide from someone who knew how to really look and see beyond surface appearances. He greeted Marina with a curt nod and launched immediately into a long list of detailed instructions about his dietary preferences, his strict schedule for meals that had to be served at exact times down to the minute, the specific way he wanted his kitchen organized and maintained, and the extensive rules about areas of the house that were off-limits to staff under any circumstances whatsoever. His voice was cold and monotone, completely devoid of any warmth or friendliness, and he never once smiled or made eye contact as he spoke to her as if she were merely another piece of equipment he had purchased, rather than a human being with feelings and dignity. Marina listened carefully, nodding occasionally and asking a few clarifying questions in a soft voice. But inside, her heart was sinking as she realized this was going to be an extremely difficult and lonely position that would test her patience and resilience in ways she hadn't fully anticipated when she accepted the job out of desperate financial necessity. However, she had no choice but to stay and do her absolute best, because she desperately needed this job to support her elderly mother who was sick and required expensive medications, and to send money to her younger brother who was trying to finish his college education and build a better life for himself than the poverty they had grown up in. The first week of work was absolutely brutal and exhausting in every possible way. Fernando was an incredibly demanding and harsh employer who noticed every tiny imperfection and was quick to criticize, but never offered a single word of appreciation or acknowledgement when something was done well. If the coffee was even slightly too hot or too cold, he would call her to his office to lecture her about maintaining proper temperature. If a meal was served 3 minutes late, he would glare at his expensive watch and make cutting remarks about the importance of punctuality and respect for other people's time. If a dish contained even a hint of too much salt or not enough seasoning, he would push the plate away with obvious disgust and dismiss her without eating anything at all, wasting hours of her careful preparation and making her feel like a complete failure. Marina had worked for many difficult employers over her 15 years of experience as a cook, but Fernando was by far the most challenging and emotionally draining person she had ever encountered in her entire professional career. Yet despite his harshness and the hostile environment, she noticed something that troubled her deeply and stirred unexpected feelings of compassion in her kind heart. Beneath all that cold exterior and demanding behavior, Fernando was profoundly and visibly unhappy in a way that went far beyond normal stress or bad moods. She observed how he ate alone every single meal in complete silence, never turning on music or television or even reading a book or newspaper for company. She noticed how he often left most of his food untouched on the plate, as if he had no appetite or interest in eating despite her best efforts to prepare delicious and appealing meals. She saw how he would sometimes pause while walking through the house and stare at empty spaces on the walls where photographs had clearly once hung before being removed, his face contorting with pain for just a moment before he caught himself and rebuilt his mask of cold indifference. One particularly telling incident happened on Thursday of that first week that gave Marina crucial insight into Fernando's true character beneath all the defensive walls he had built. She was preparing dinner in the late afternoon, making a traditional Brazilian dish called feijoada that her own mother had taught her to make when she was just a young girl learning to cook in their tiny kitchen in the favela where they lived. The rich smells of black beans slowly simmering with various meats, the aromatic spices, the fresh orange slices and collard greens being prepared as accompaniments, all combined to fill the kitchen with warmth and comfort that reminded her powerfully of her childhood home, despite all its poverty and struggles. Fernando had come down from his office earlier than usual, drawn by the smell even though he clearly tried to act as if he wasn't interested or affected by it in any way. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her work for several long minutes without saying anything at all. And when Marina turned around and saw him standing there, she noticed something remarkable and completely unexpected. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears, and his usual harsh expression had softened into something that looked almost like longing or deep nostalgia for something lost and irretrievable. For just a brief moment, the mask slipped completely, and she could see the profound loneliness and pain of a man who was absolutely starving for connection and warmth, but had forgotten how to accept it or ask for it without making himself vulnerable. Marina made a split-second decision that would change everything between them in ways neither could have predicted at that moment. Instead of pretending she hadn't seen his emotional reaction or ignoring it to preserve his dignity as most people would have done, she spoke to him gently and warmly, as if he were family rather than her employer. She told him in a soft voice that smelled good because her mother had taught her to cook with love, and that food made with care and genuine affection always tasted better than food made mechanically or with resentment. She explained that in her culture and upbringing, the kitchen was the heart of the home where family gathered and where love was expressed through the patient preparation of meals meant to nourish not just bodies, but souls as well. She invited him, not demanded or expected, but genuinely invited him to sit at the kitchen table and keep her company while she finished cooking if he had time and didn't mind being in a working kitchen rather than the formal dining room he usually insisted upon. Fernando stood frozen for a long moment, clearly shocked by this unexpected kindness and informal warmth that nobody had shown him in years. And she could see him wrestling internally with whether to maintain his cold distance or accept this olive branch of simple human connection. Finally, slowly and hesitantly, as if he were doing something dangerous or forbidden, he pulled out a chair and sat down at the worn wooden kitchen table that the staff used for their own meals. What followed was the first real conversation Fernando had experienced in years where someone spoke to him as a human being rather than as a boss, a client, a business contact, or someone who wanted something from him. Marina talked about her mother who was sick and whom she visited every Sunday without fail, about her younger brother who was studying engineering and working part-time jobs to help pay for his education, about the small neighborhood where she had grown up and where everyone knew everyone else and looked out for each other despite having almost nothing in material terms. She spoke about her dreams of one day opening a small restaurant where she could cook traditional food and create a warm, welcoming space that felt like family for everyone who entered. She asked him questions too, not invasive or prying questions, but simple human questions about whether he liked this type of food, whether he had traveled to the region where this dish originated, whether he had family or friends he usually shared meals with. Fernando found himself answering honestly for the first time in years, instead of giving the polished corporate responses he had perfected over decades. He admitted that he used to love this kind of traditional food because his grandmother used to make it when he was a child growing up poor in the countryside before his family moved to the city seeking better opportunities. He confessed that he ate alone every single meal these days because he had no family who spoke to him anymore and no real friends because he had sacrificed all his personal relationships on the altar of professional success and ambition. He revealed, his voice cracking slightly with emotion he could no longer fully suppress, that he sometimes wondered if all his wealth and success had been worth the terrible price he had paid in loneliness and isolation. Marina listened with genuine compassion and without judgment, as this powerful, wealthy man who seemed to have everything showed her his broken heart and admitted his deep regrets about choices made and relationships lost. She didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances or try to minimize his pain by comparing it to others who had less money or comfort. Instead, she simply acknowledged his feelings as real and valid and told him something her mother had often said when Marina herself was struggling with difficulties in her life. She said that it's never too late to change direction and start building the life you actually want, rather than the life you think you're supposed to have, or that society expects of you. She told him that family isn't just about blood relations, but about the people you choose to let into your heart and life, and who choose to be there for you in return through good times and bad. She suggested that perhaps starting with small acts of kindness and connection right now, in this present moment, could begin to heal some of the deep wounds and fill some of the emptiness he was feeling so acutely every single day. That evening, for the first time in literally years, Fernando ate a complete meal and actually tasted and enjoyed the food, rather than mechanically consuming nutrients while his mind was elsewhere on business problems and financial calculations. He ate at the kitchen table with Marina sitting across from him, rather than alone in the formal dining room that felt like a museum or mausoleum. They talked about simple things, everyday things, human things that had nothing to do with money or business or status or success in conventional terms. They laughed together at a funny story she told about her nephew's antics, and Fernando realized with a shock that he couldn't remember the last time he had genuinely laughed about anything at all. When the meal was finished and Marina stood to clean up and prepare to leave for the day, Fernando did something that surprised both of them. He thanked her sincerely and warmly, not just for the food, but for the conversation and the company, and the reminder that there were good people in the world who cared about others beyond what they could get from them. Marina smiled at him, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes and lit up her kind face, and told him that he was welcome any time to sit in the kitchen and keep her company while she cooked, if he wanted the companionship rather than eating alone in that big, empty dining room. Over the following weeks and months, a surprising and beautiful transformation began to occur in that previously cold and lifeless house. Fernando started spending more and more time in the kitchen during meal preparations, initially claiming he wanted to ensure the food was being prepared to his standards, but really just craving the warmth and human connection that Marina's presence provided so naturally. Marina began bringing small touches of life and personality into the space, with her permission and sometimes without it, placing a small vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen table that brightened the whole room, playing soft music while she cooked that filled the silence with melody and rhythm, occasionally bringing her nephew to visit during school holidays, which brought the sound of a child's laughter into those halls for the first time in years. Fernando slowly began to open up more and more about his past, his regrets, his fears, his disappointments, and Marina listened patiently and compassionately while offering gentle wisdom from her own life experiences that helped him see things from different perspectives he had never considered before in his single-minded pursuit of wealth and status. A crisis moment came when Fernando's adult daughter, Sofia, called unexpectedly one evening after years of minimal contact to inform him coldly and without emotion that she was getting married in 3 months and that he was not invited to the wedding because she and her brother had discussed it and decided that his presence would just make everyone uncomfortable, given all the pain and conflict from the past. The phone call lasted less than 5 minutes, and when it ended, Fernando sat completely still in his office chair, staring at the wall for nearly an hour, not moving, barely breathing, feeling like he had been physically punched in the stomach and couldn't recover from the blow. Marina found him there when she came to ask about dinner plans, and even though he tried to wave her away and pretend everything was fine, she could see the devastation written all over his face and the way his hands were trembling despite his best efforts to control himself. Instead of leaving him alone as he demanded, she pulled up a chair and sat quietly beside him, not touching him, but just being present in his pain, without trying to fix it or make it go away with words that wouldn't help anyway in a moment like this, when the depth of loss and rejection was so overwhelming. After a long silence, Fernando finally spoke in a broken voice that Marina had never heard from him before, all his usual confidence and control completely stripped away, leaving only raw, wounded vulnerability. He told her everything about the divorce, about how his obsession with work had destroyed his marriage piece by piece over many years, until there was nothing left but resentment and anger, about how his children had watched him choose business deals over their school plays and sports games and important life moments again and again until they stopped expecting him to show up and eventually stopped inviting him at all, about how he had told himself he was doing it all for them to provide them, with every material advantage possible. But really it had been about his own ego and need to prove himself after growing up poor and powerless. He admitted that he had become exactly what he once despised, a rich man with no soul and no real human connections, and that he didn't know how to fix it or if it was even possible to repair the damage he had done through years of neglect and emotional absence. Marina let him speak without interruption, until all the words and pain had poured out like poison that needed to be expelled. And then she spoke to him with a directness and honesty that only a true friend would risk. She told him that he was right, that he had made serious mistakes and hurt people he loved through his choices and priorities, but that wallowing in guilt and regret while doing nothing to change was just another form of selfishness and avoiding responsibility. She said that if he truly wanted to repair his relationships with his children, it would require more than apologies or throwing money at the problem. It would require genuine, sustained effort over time to show through actions rather than words that he had actually changed and become a different kind of man than the one who had failed them before. She challenged him directly, asking if he was willing to be humble enough to admit his failures fully without making excuses, patient enough to accept that rebuilding trust takes years, not weeks, and persistent enough to keep trying even when his children rejected his initial attempts because they had every right to be angry and skeptical after being disappointed so many times. She told him that the first step was not trying to force his way into the wedding he wasn't invited to, but respecting his daughter's boundaries while finding other ways to demonstrate that he cared about her happiness more than his own hurt feelings. Fernando listened to every word, and for the first time in his adult life, he actually heard constructive criticism without becoming defensive or angry because it was delivered with genuine care rather than judgment or manipulation. Over the next several weeks, Fernando worked with Marina's guidance to craft a heartfelt letter to his daughter, Sofia, that took more than a dozen revisions to get right. In it, he took full responsibility for his failures as a father without making excuses or blaming his ex-wife or claiming that work pressures had forced his choices. He acknowledged specifically how his absence at important moments must have hurt her and made her feel unloved and unimportant compared to his business interests. He congratulated her sincerely on her upcoming marriage and told her that he respected her decision not to include him and wouldn't try to force his way in or cause any drama or problems. He asked only that she accept an envelope containing a check for whatever amount she wanted to use toward the wedding or honeymoon or future, with no strings attached and no expectation of reconciliation, simply because he wanted to contribute something positive to this important moment in her life, even if he couldn't be there in person. He ended by saying that he was working on becoming a better person and that he would always love her and be hoping for a chance someday to prove through consistent actions over time that he had truly changed, but that he understood if she was never ready to give him that chance, and he would respect whatever she decided. The letter was sent with the check, and Fernando waited with anxiety and hope for any response, though Marina had cautioned him not to expect immediate results or dramatic reconciliation because real healing from deep wounds takes significant time. 3 weeks later, a brief text message came from Sofia that simply said thank you for the letter and the gift, and that she appreciated him respecting her boundaries and not trying to manipulate his way into her wedding. It wasn't much, barely even a crack in the wall between them, but it was more than Fernando had received from her in over 2 years, and it gave him a small fraction fragile hope that perhaps eventually there might be a path forward toward some kind of relationship, even if never what it should have been. Marina celebrated this tiny victory with him as if it were a major breakthrough, because she understood that sometimes the smallest steps forward are the hardest ones to take and deserve to be acknowledged and encouraged. She helped him understand that this was a marathon, not a sprint, and that the most important thing was to be consistent and patient and keep showing up with love and respect without demanding or expecting anything in return. As the months continued to pass and seasons changed, the relationship between Fernando and Marina deepened from employer and employee into something that neither of them had quite expected or planned, but that felt natural and right. They discovered that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company and conversation, that they could talk for hours about everything and nothing, that they made each other laugh regularly and could sit together in comfortable silence without awkwardness. Fernando found himself eagerly looking forward to coming home from the office each day, not to an empty cold house, but to warmth and conversation and the delicious smell of dinner being prepared with care. Marina found herself thinking about Fernando throughout her day and smiling when she remembered something funny he had said, or looking forward to telling him about something interesting that had happened. There was an unspoken understanding growing between them that transcended the original boundaries of their professional relationship, though neither of them acknowledged it directly or put words to it because both were afraid of ruining what they had by trying to make it into something else. The turning point came during the Christmas holiday season when Fernando's office closed for 2 weeks and he found himself with more free time than he knew what to do with and no family to spend it with. Marina had planned to visit her mother and brother in their old neighborhood for Christmas Day and the following few days, as she always did, but she surprised Fernando by inviting him to join her if he wanted to experience a real family Christmas celebration instead of spending the holiday alone in his mansion. She warned him that it would be very different from the kind of Christmas he was probably used to, that her family home was tiny and crowded and noisy, that there wouldn't be expensive gifts or fancy decorations or elaborate meals, but that there would be love and laughter and warmth and a genuine welcome for anyone who came with good intentions. Fernando was simultaneously terrified and deeply moved by this invitation, and after much internal debate about whether he would be imposing or whether he belonged in that space, he accepted with genuine gratitude. Christmas Day at Marina's family home was a revelation and transformation for Fernando in ways he struggled to articulate even to himself. The house was indeed tiny, barely bigger than his garage, crowded with relatives and neighbors coming and going throughout the day, noisy with children playing and adults talking and laughing and music playing constantly. There were no designer decorations or coordinated color schemes, just handmade ornaments and strings of cheap lights and tinsel that looked like it had been used and carefully saved for decades. The food was simple and traditional, prepared by many hands working together in a kitchen barely big enough for 3 people, served on mismatched plates, and eaten at a table that had to be extended with boards balanced on sawhorses to fit everyone. But the warmth and joy and genuine love and connection in that space was something Fernando had never experienced, even in his wealthiest and most successful moments. Marina's elderly mother, despite her illness, greeted him with a warm hug as if he were her own son coming home, asking him questions about his life with genuine interest and making sure he had enough food and felt included in every conversation and activity. Her younger brother, instead of being intimidated or resentful of his wealth, treated him as a regular person and shared stories and jokes and included him naturally in discussions about sports and music and life. The children ran around playing with simple toys and seemed happier than the privileged kids Fernando had seen at expensive parties with rooms full of the latest gadgets and games, because they had what children need most, which is attention and love and safety and family surrounding them. As Fernando sat in that crowded, warm house surrounded by people who had welcomed a complete stranger into their most important family celebration simply because Marina vouched for him, he felt something crack open deep inside his chest that had been frozen solid for years. He realized with stunning clarity that he had spent decades pursuing and accumulating exactly the wrong things, that all his money and success and possessions meant absolutely nothing compared to this kind of connection and belonging and warmth, that he had been living in a prison of luxury while these people with almost nothing material were actually rich beyond measure in the things that actually matter in life. When it came time to leave late that evening, Fernando found himself reluctant to go back to his empty mansion, and Marina's mother seemed to sense this because she hugged him tightly and told him in a gentle voice that he was always welcome in their home, and that she hoped he would come back to visit soon because Marina had told her what a good man he was becoming, and she could see it in his eyes and the way he treated people with respect regardless of their social status. In the car driving back to his mansion, Fernando was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had experienced and felt that day, and Marina sat beside him equally quiet, giving him space to think and feel without pressure to explain or discuss until he was ready. Finally, he spoke in a voice thick with emotion and said something that surprised even himself with its honesty and vulnerability. He told Marina that today had been the best Christmas he could remember in his entire adult life. Better than all the expensive vacations and fancy parties and elaborate celebrations he had experienced over the years, because it was real and warm and filled with people who genuinely cared about each other rather than networking or competing or trying to impress anyone. He thanked her profoundly for including him in something so personal and precious, and said that he didn't know how to repay her for the gift she had given him today, of showing him what really matters and what kind of life is actually worth living. Marina reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently, and told him that the best way to repay her was to take these lessons to heart and continue becoming the man she could see he was capable of being, the man who existed underneath all the defensive walls and fear and loneliness, the man who had the capacity for great kindness and love if he would just allow himself to be vulnerable enough to give and receive it freely. Over the following months, Fernando made dramatic changes in his life that shocked everyone who knew him professionally and had known only his cold businessman persona. He started leaving the office at reasonable hours instead of working until midnight every night, making time for volunteer work at a community center that Marina had told him about, where he could use his business skills to help people starting small enterprises and getting financial literacy training. He reached out consistently to his children with regular brief messages, letting them know he was thinking of them without demanding responses or trying to force relationship progress on his timetable instead of theirs. He began attending a support group for divorced men struggling with isolation and depression, something he never would have considered before because it required admitting weakness and asking for help from strangers. He started having regular dinner parties at his home, not fancy corporate networking events, but casual, comfortable gatherings where he invited Marina's family and friends and work colleagues and people from the community center, filling his house with noise and laughter and life for the first time since his divorce. The biggest change was in his relationship with Marina herself, which had evolved slowly but undeniably from employer-employee to deep friendship to something more that neither had quite acknowledged directly, but both felt intensely. They spent almost all their free time together now, cooking meals side by side in the kitchen, watching movies on the couch, taking long walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing, sitting in comfortable silence, reading books while music played softly in the background. There was a tenderness and care between them that went beyond friendship, a way of looking at each other that held warmth and affection, and something deeper that neither wanted to name for fear of ruining what they had or making it complicated. Marina knew that everyone in her family had noticed how she lit up whenever Fernando was mentioned, how she smiled at her phone when he sent her funny messages throughout the day, how she talked about him constantly without seeming to realize how obvious her feelings were. Fernando knew that his colleagues had started asking questions about why he seemed so much happier lately and whether he was dating someone, though he avoided answering directly because he wasn't sure how to categorize what he and Marina had, or whether she felt the same way he did. The moment of truth came on Marina's 35th birthday, which fell on a Saturday in May when spring was in full bloom and the weather was absolutely perfect. Fernando had planned something special without telling her any details, just asking her to clear her schedule for the entire day and trust him. He picked her up early in the morning and drove her to the countryside, to a small town several hours away where she had grown up before her family moved to the city seeking better opportunities. Marina was shocked and deeply touched that he had researched her childhood and found this place and remembered details from stories she had told him months ago about her happy early years in that small rural community. He had arranged for them to visit her old elementary school, which still stood though it had been renovated, to walk through the small town square where she used to play as a child, to visit the little church where she had been baptized and where her grandmother was buried. They had lunch at a simple restaurant that served traditional local food, and Marina's eyes filled with tears of joy and gratitude that Fernando had given her this gift of reconnecting with her roots and honoring her past, instead of being embarrassed by her humble origins, as some wealthy people might have been. The day was perfect and magical, filled with laughter and stories and shared joy. But what made it truly unforgettable was what happened as the sun was setting and they were driving back toward the city. Fernando pulled over at a scenic overlook where they could see the countryside spread out below them, bathed in golden light, and he turned to Marina with an intensity and vulnerability in his eyes that took her breath away. He told her that he needed to say something he had been thinking about for months, but had been too afraid to express because he didn't want to lose her friendship or make things weird between them if she didn't feel the same way. He said that she had transformed his entire life in ways he couldn't adequately put into words, that she had shown him what it meant to live authentically and love generously and value what truly matters, instead of chasing empty status and success. He admitted that he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her, not just with her kindness and warmth, but with everything about who she was as a person, and that he wanted to build a life together if she would have him, even though he knew he didn't deserve her after being such a difficult person for so long. Marina sat completely still, processing these words she had secretly hoped to hear, but never quite believed would be spoken. And when she finally responded, her voice was shaking with emotion. She told Fernando that she had fallen in love with him too, not with his money or status, which meant nothing to her anyway, but with the man she had watched emerge from behind all the defensive walls over these past months. The man who was learning to be vulnerable and authentic and kind. The man who had the courage to change and grow instead of staying stuck in old patterns, even when change was hard and uncomfortable. She said that she had been afraid to hope for anything beyond friendship because the differences in their backgrounds and social positions seemed too vast to bridge, but that if he truly meant what he was saying, then yes, she wanted to try building a life together and see where this journey might lead them both. They kissed as the sun set completely, and it felt like both an ending of their old separate lives and a beginning of something new and precious they would create together. The following year brought challenges and adjustments as they navigated merging their very different worlds and dealing with judgment and criticism from various sources who questioned their relationship for different reasons. Some of Fernando's business associates made snide comments about him dating his former cook and implied she must be after his money, though Fernando shut down those conversations immediately and eventually distanced himself from people who couldn't respect the woman he loved. Some of Marina's extended family and friends worried that she was getting involved with someone so different from her background and warned her to be careful and protect herself emotionally and financially, though Marina appreciated their concern but assured them that Fernando had proven himself trustworthy through consistent actions over many months. Fernando's children took longer to come around, understandably skeptical about their father's ability to maintain this positive change and suspicious that this relationship might be another selfish pursuit that would end badly when he got bored or distracted by work again. Sophia agreed to meet Marina for coffee one afternoon as a gesture of giving her father a chance, though she made it clear this didn't mean she forgave him for everything or that they were suddenly going to be one big happy family overnight. That coffee meeting was tense and difficult at first, with Sophia clearly prepared to dislike and judge Marina as part of her resentment toward her father. But Marina's genuine warmth and complete lack of pretense or defensiveness gradually softened Sophia's hostility. Marina didn't make excuses for Fernando or try to convince Sophia to forgive him or defend his past behavior in any way. Instead, she listened compassionately as Sophia expressed years of hurt and anger and disappointment, validated those feelings as completely understandable and justified, and shared honestly that Fernando was doing real work to become a different kind of man, but that she understood why Sophia would need to see sustained evidence over time before trusting him again. She talked about her own relationship with her father, who had died when she was young, about how she wished she had more time with him, even though their relationship had been imperfect, about how life is short and unpredictable, and sometimes the chance to heal and rebuild comes with an expiration date we don't know about until it's too late. By the end of that conversation, Sophia wasn't ready to embrace her father or Marina fully, but the ice had cracked enough that she agreed to have dinner with both of them in a few weeks and see how it went. 2 years after that first Christmas celebration at Marina's family home, Fernando and Marina got married in a simple, beautiful ceremony that perfectly reflected their values and the journey they had traveled together. It wasn't held at an expensive venue or church, but in Marina's mother's small backyard that they decorated with handmade decorations and strings of lights, surrounded only by their closest family and friends who had supported them throughout this journey. Sophia and her brother both attended, which felt like a miracle and a gift, even though their relationship with their father was still a work in progress that had good days and difficult days. Fernando's business associates were not invited because this day was about love and family and what actually matters, not about networking or maintaining professional relationships that were shallow and transactional. They exchanged vows they had written themselves that made everyone cry, including Fernando, who had once thought himself too tough and controlled to cry in front of others, but had learned through Marina's patient teaching that vulnerability and authentic emotion were strengths, not weaknesses. Marina promised to continue challenging him to be his best self and to never let him slip back into old patterns of work obsession and emotional avoidance. And Fernando promised to honor her family and background as precious gifts rather than things to overcome or be embarrassed about, and to keep learning every day what it means to truly love someone with actions and not just words. The party afterward was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect, with Marina's extended family and neighborhood friends bringing traditional dishes and teaching Fernando's business colleagues who had been invited despite everything how to dance to Brazilian music and telling embarrassing funny stories about Marina as a child. Fernando spent most of the evening with the biggest genuine smile on his face that anyone had ever seen, dancing with his new wife and her mother and his daughter Sophia, who was starting to soften toward him finally after seeing how happy Marina made him and how much he had truly changed. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Fernando found a quiet moment with Marina's elderly mother, who had become like a mother to him as well over these past years. She took both his hands in hers and told him with tears in her wise eyes that she was grateful to God for bringing him into Marina's life and into their family, that she had been worried about Marina being alone and working so hard without someone to love her the way she deserved, and that she could see that he truly loved her daughter with his whole heart, and she was trusting him with her most precious treasure, and she believed he would honor that trust. Today, 3 years after that first day, when Marina arrived nervous and hesitant at Fernando's cold, empty mansion, they lived together in a smaller, more comfortable house that they chose together in a middle-class neighborhood that feels like community rather than isolated luxury. Fernando still runs his business successfully, but has restructured everything to allow for better work-life balance, hiring managers to handle things he used to insist on controlling personally, and he leaves work every day by 6 p.m. to come home to have dinner with Marina. The old mansion was sold, and the money was split between charitable donations to organizations that help low-income families and trusts set up for his children and grandchildren that will vest only if they complete college or vocational training and demonstrate commitment to careers and families. Fernando and Marina volunteered together every weekend at the community center, teaching cooking classes and financial literacy workshops, sharing their different types of knowledge and experience to help others build better lives. Fernando's relationship with his children is still imperfect and sometimes strained, but they have regular contact now, and his daughter Sophia is pregnant with his first grandchild, and has asked Marina for advice about parenting, which feels like a significant bridge being built. The most profound change isn't in external circumstances, but in Fernando himself. He smiles and laughs easily now, something that seemed impossible just a few years ago. He has close friendships for the first time in decades with people who knew him before he had wealth and success and like him just for who he is as a person. He has learned to be present in moments instead of always thinking about the next business deal or acquisition, to value experiences and relationships over possessions and status symbols, to measure success by the depth of his connections and the positive impact he makes on people's lives rather than by the size of his bank account or the prestige of his professional achievements. Most importantly, he has learned that it's never too late to change direction and start living authentically according to your values rather than according to what society or your ego tells you success should look like. The real lesson of this story isn't about romance across class divides, though that's part of it. And it's not about redemption, though that's certainly central to Fernando's journey. The deeper truth is about the transformative power of human connection and authentic relationship when we're willing to be vulnerable enough to let others see who we really are beneath all our defenses and masks. It's about how one person living with genuine kindness and integrity can change someone else's entire life trajectory simply by being consistently themselves and offering warmth and acceptance without judgment or ulterior motives. It's about how we all need to be seen and known and loved for who we actually are rather than who we pretend to be or what we've accomplished, and how that kind of authentic connection is more valuable than any amount of money or professional success or social status. It's about having the courage to admit we've been wrong about our priorities and the humility to accept help and guidance from unexpected sources and the persistence to keep working on becoming better humans, even when it's uncomfortable and difficult. If you enjoyed this deeply moving story and felt touched by the transformation and redemption you witnessed, please leave a like on this video so I know this kind of inspiring content resonates with you, and I should create more stories like this that remind us what really matters in life beyond material success. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future stories about human connection, personal growth, overcoming adversity, and finding meaning in unexpected places. And please share in the comments your own thoughts about this story and whether you've ever experienced or witnessed a similar transformation in your own life or someone you know, because your stories and perspectives add so much value to this community we're building together of people who believe that change is always possible and that authentic connection is what makes life worth living.